We've got Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Whenever the commissioner wants to get started.
Thank you so much. Good
ahead.
morning, Margie Van Dieven, Commissioner of Education for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and it is an opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to present House Bill 2. Investing in education has always been a priority for the state of Missouri, and we are pleased to see that this commitment continues to grow. Last year, we received over 20 new appropriation lines from the legislature, and we continue to administer a significant amount of relief funds in support of overall advancements in education and Missouri's future. I will move quickly through my opening remarks, considering our budget book includes over 1,200 pages, and we appreciate your continued support and look forward to addressing any questions that you might have. The department's focus has been on a variety of fronts: administering relief funds in support of learning acceleration, building capacity and quality in early childhood and child care, creating systems of support to enhance reading and math instruction and to address the mental health needs of students and staff, expanding access to real-world learning opportunities through increased career and technical education offerings and assessment redesign, and building the educator pipeline and retaining highly qualified staff. Yet we know it is those closest to the classroom who directly impact our students' learning. Therefore, the State Board of Education prioritized the request of full funding of the foundation formula to assist our local school districts and charter schools in educating the almost 900,000 pre-K through 12 students enrolled in our public schools. Under the existing statute, we were required to recalculate the state adequacy target for fiscal year 25, which resulted in an increase this year after 5 years at the same target. Dr. Monsis will be addressing this in his comments during our testimony today, as there may be some questions on that topic. We also prioritized a request to maintain full funding for transportation. Transporting our children to and from school is required by state law, and many Missouri families count on this service. When it is not funded through the transportation formula budget line, districts must find the money elsewhere, often the classroom. So we are grateful that this body and Governor Parson have fully funded transportation for the past 2 years. Our other requests align to the department's Show Me Success plan, of which I hope you have a copy, and demonstrate our commitment to improving lives through education. While we will primarily focus on our PK through 12 systems, you will see House Bill 2 serves Missourians at all points in life. Some in our Office of Childhood as early as birth, and others in our adult learning and rehabilitation services and special education offices and their adulthood. We appreciate the continued support. May I hand it to Dr. Monsis? Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Kerry Monses, Deputy Commissioner for Financial Administrative Services. Joining me at the table will be Pam Victor, our Chief Budget Officer. And Mr. Chairman, if you prefer, do you want us to touch on new decision items this morning? Excellent. We'll be glad to do that. We have several other team members with us today if there are questions that Pam and I can't answer. Pam will give you a quick summary of each of the NDIs, starting with our first book, and I'll add a few comments along the way.
Good morning. Pam Victor, Chief Budget Officer. Beginning in Book 1 on page 7 is the new decision item for pay plan, including the 3.2% increase, as well as a lump sum for our 24/7 direct care staff at the Missouri School for the Blind and School for the Deaf. Our next new decision item is on page 64. This was just referenced by the commissioner. This is the increase in the foundation formula from moving from a state adequacy target of 63.75 to 67.60, request for $120.6 million.
This is obviously our largest request, and so I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody might have.
Yeah, so, and I know the director and I visited at the beginning of session about this. So kind of walk me through what is driving this change.
Sure. So every 2 years we do recalculate this. It is based on the high-performing districts across the state under our accountability system. The biggest driver of this change is that we've moved from MSIP 5 to MSIP 6. MSIP 6 had much more rigorous standards in terms of scoring, and so the pool of districts that were included in the performance group that we looked to analyze was a much smaller group that most people would identify as really high-performing districts, and in many cases higher spending districts as well. So by calculating their factors based under the statute, it led to a higher calculation of the SAT this time.
And that change in calculation, that was a policy shift by the department, or what mandated that?
So the MSIP criteria are set by the State Board of Education through a rulemaking process. And so that process began several years ago, was interrupted by COVID, and then finally got implemented and in just the last 2 years. So we're just 2 years into the MSIP 6 generation, if you will, and those years impacted who was eligible to be in the performance districts for this calculation.
Okay, so the board actually controls how that formula then works. 'Cause, I mean, here's what I'm getting at. Does if we adopt this recommendation from DESE this year, are we basically setting a precedent that anytime the Board of Education wants to change that calculation, that they're basically changing the calculation of the foundation formula, and the board is controlling how much money is appropriated by the General Assembly?
I think that's an indirect relationship in some regards. Obviously, when the board is establishing their criteria, they're trying to drive improvement across districts in the state. They have no way of knowing for sure how that translates into the SAT calculation. We don't know that, as the rules being promulgated related to that. So I think there is a link there, obviously,
Right.
but there's no definitive they're driving this. And of course, all of this is subject to appropriation each year and every year anyway.
Right. But, we oftentimes like to say, we fully funded the foundation formula, and there's some political pressure by the General Assembly to do that. And I guess my point is, and I'm not saying there was some nefarious purpose behind this. I'm just saying, if this change that was driven by the board resulted in $120 million of new GR commitment to the foundation formula, and we say, okay, this year, then it sort of sets the precedent for future boards to say, well, we can just kind of change the foundation formula on our own through the rulemaking process.
I don't think that was part of their thought making, to be honest with you. I was not with the department when that rule was passed, but I don't believe that was the intent of that. It was really about driving improvement. And I also want to remind folks that the SAT had been the same level for 5 years previously, so it hadn't grown. In fact, it hasn't grown much since the inception of the formula, from 61.17 to 63.75. It's been in a pretty narrow range for an extended period of time. So that it's had pressures in both directions for one reason or another.
And then one last question. So you're familiar, I assume, at least generically, with the bill that we passed out of the Senate right before spring break that changed the foundation formula.
Correct.
Do we know, I'm assuming the fiscal note that was generated for that, did it take into account these changes as being true?
So the fiscal note that was generated for that were on top of what would have been
Okay.
the increase for this year and next year by the SAT change.
Okay.
And so we did an estimate based on our current data of what that impact would be if that were on top of these changes.
Okay, got it. Okay, I just wanted to make sure the fiscal note was taking this into account.
Yep.
It sounds like it is.
It is. We'll just qualify that the version that's posted most recently, it appears it includes the first year of that 5-year phase-in. I don't believe it contains, at this point, all 5 years of that. So I do believe there may be an update that needs to happen yet. So.
Okay, thank you.
Page 68 is the new decision item for the county foreign insurance transfer for $30 million for additional funding in that source, offset by a $30 million general revenue reduction. This goes to fund the foundation formula. Page 82 is the new decision item referenced by the commissioner to fully fund the 75% of the school district's reimbursable cost for transportation, request for $14 million. The next new decision item is on page 136. This is the school district trust fund, request for $119.3 million due to increased Prop C sales tax revenues. Page 157 is the new decision item for CTE limited access, recommended by the governor for $2 million. This is an additional funding for career and technical education programs in desert areas of the state to include a 25% match for these programs. Page 177 is a new decision item recommended by the governor For ESSER 3 initiatives, $11.6 million is recommended for this. You will see later in our budget 3 decision items that this takes the place of as we move through here. This will fund will continue to fund literacy coaches, math coaches, and leadership development coaches.
Just a comment I would add there. Our initial request was to fund some of these initiatives that had been funded with relief funds with GR. And in looking at our relief fund capacity that we have remaining, we think we can extend this for another year with relief funds, which is what this request represents. It will require us to do a liquidation extension because of the timing of the funding. It's supposed to be expended by January of 25 coming up. We can do a liquidation extension to go a year beyond that if need be, and that would get us through next fiscal year with these initiatives.
The next new decision item is on page 218. This is the school nutrition federal grant funding. The request is for $37.7 million, and this is the federal funding needed to cover the cost of meals and school nutrition grants and to prevent any delays to the schools. The next new decision item is on page 222. This is for the summer EBT program recommended by the governor for $548,000 and 4 FTE. To administer the summer EBT program, we'll be working in collaboration with the Department of Social Services to get the $40 per month per child added on the EBT cards. That gets us to Book 2. The first new decision item in Book 2 is on page 258. This is a new decision item recommended by the governor for $1.5 million to sustain the current level of career advising throughout the state. This also includes a local match.
This is the Root Ed model you may have heard about.
Page 228 is the new decision item for career letter recommended by the governor for $5.8 million.
284.
Excuse me, 284, sorry. $5.8 million to fund the increasingly popular Career Ladder program, which helps with teacher retention. Page 298 is the new decision item for teacher baseline salary. This is a recommendation by the governor for $4,011,000. This would raise the teacher baseline education salary to $40,000 plus the benefits with no local match. The next new decision item is on page 361. And this is teacher recruitment and retention, Missouri Leadership Development Systems, currently funded through the ESSER funds. And this was the GR request that Dr. Monsas just referenced that is being taken care of by the ESSER 3 initiative, new decision item on page 177. That then brings us to the Book 3. And our first new decision item in Book 3 is on page 437. This was the GR request for the continued funding for the literacy coaches. That's also being covered by the ESSER 3 initiative new decision item. Page 443 was the GR request for the math coaches under the Math Mastery program, and that's also being funded under the ESSER 3 initiative new decision item. That brings us to page 554. This is the new decision item for registered youth apprenticeships. This is an additional $116,000 to expand the contracted support for the youth apprenticeship program. That then brings us to Book 4. And our first new decision item in Book 4 is on page 839. This is a special education grant IDEA federal funding increase of $8.8 million to increase the federal funding authority to fully reimburse and distribute the Part B federal grant awards under IDEA. Page 865 is the next new decision item. This is the request by the department for $6.5 million to fully fund the non-domiciled school districts under the public placement program. That brings us to Book 5.
So that wasn't recommended by the governor?
Senator Carl May, are you seeking?
Yes, I mean, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, no, we're good. Please.
Correct, it was not recommended by the governor.
And do we know why?
There was an increase for this fiscal year. There was a partial veto. There was an increase that was reduced down to a different amount. This process, we requested the gap between where we're funded now and the full amount. I don't have any specific information about the rationale on the recommendation.
Thank you.
I believe that gets us to Book 5. The first new decision item in Book 5 is on page 942. This is the Early Childhood Special Education caseload growth request for $1.9 million. Prior to COVID, we had one of these every year, and during COVID did not, so this is then returning again. This is to meet the additional caseload growth related to this program. The next new decision item is on page 1024, and this is for the First Steps program. This is $1.5 million in funding for the Title 19 Medicaid program. We had Title 21 Medicaid funding and weren't able to use that. We were able to use the Title 19 funding, so that's the request for this one. Page 1030 is the new decision item request for the Language Equality and Acquisition for Deaf Kids, our LEAD K. This was passed as part of House Bill 447 last year and is the request for the ITSD and program cost related to setting up this program. Request for $596,000. Next, on page 1073, is a request for federal funding authority for the Child Care Quality Initiative funds, just for 2 grants that we don't have quite enough funding to expend the full federal request, federal grant. This is for $47,178. Page 1110 is the new decision item for the child care subsidy funding. This is a GR replacement of ARP child care discretionary and stabilization funding that is ending. Request for $78.4 million. Page 1115 is a child care subsidy rate increase recommended by the governor for $51.7 million. This would take our current 58th percentile rates up to the 100th percentile for infants and toddlers and up to the 65th percentile for preschool and school-age children. The next increase is on page 1119. This one goes along with the increase requested on page 1123. This is for the Transitional Subsidy Child Care Program that was established as a result of Senate Bills 45, 90, and 106 and that was done last year. This is the admin request to stand this program up. It's for $448,000 and 5 FTE. And then on page 1123 is the IT request to build the program to run this, to administer this. Next is on page 1160, and that is the ARP Child Care Discretionary Grant. This is additional federal authority of $125 million, so we're able to fully an additional year to expend that same $6 million. That brings us to Book 6, and there's only one in there, and that is on page 1251. This is the Classroom Trust Fund Gaming, and that is a transfer of an additional $50 million into the foundation formula. And that concludes all of our new decision items.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee?
Yes.
Senator May?
So when we go through all of this funding, do every school district in the state, every school, have counselors in those schools?
I would say.
Is it a requirement, I'm saying, for them, for the school to have counselors?
There are recommended counselor levels. There are not absolute requirements. If a school district, for some reason, is not meeting performance standards, that is one of the resource standards we can look at in terms of making recommendations and providing supports. But I think in most cases, you will find some level of counseling support in every school. They sometimes share in small buildings, but generally you'll find that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Good? All right, that will conclude the hearing for DESE this morning. I'll just remind the folks that are here, tomorrow we've got the Department of Ag, Conservation, plan on voting on the supplemental that Dan Hogg presented, the week before spring break. And then we've got a little mandated tax credit hearing also, which is always really fun. So, see everybody tomorrow morning.